Hi, I'm Salim Ismail. I'm the founding executive director and global ambassador at Singularity University.
It was amazing. I mean, it was titled Mind-Altering Substance, and you couldn't come away from it without having your perspectives changed.
The biggest marketplace in the history of humanity is being created right now under our noses. And the question is, will you be able to keep pace? People at the edge have enormous advantage, and you are at the edge. In this next century or two, it's going to be a huge advantage to be a small country. And countries like New Zealand have an enormous advantage. It comes completely down to the mindset. Here's the fundamental crux of it. We are not good at spotting this exponential change. All of our intuition, education, training about the world is linear. If I take 30 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'll get 30 meters, I'll get out to the front lobby, and we can all predict really well where I'd be a third of the way or 2/3 of the way in that progression. Right? We're very good at that linear extrapolation. But if I take 30 exponential steps and I go 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, and I do that 30 times, at step 30, I've gone 1 billion meters. I'm 26 times around the world, which is a bit further than the front lobby over there. And it's hard to gauge where I am a third of the way or 2/3 of the way in that progression. And more of the world, driven by this information paradigm, is riding this green curve as opposed to the linear curve that we're all used to. And this is essentially the heart of the cognitive issue that we have, and the heart of what we're trying to teach is spot those doubling patterns. Because if you don't spot this curve early, it will disrupt you very badly. If you spot it early, it's the biggest advantage you could possibly have. Peter Diamandis just wrote this book, Abundance. Anybody read Abundance? Worth reading. Bill Clinton just called it one of the 2 most important books that he's read. Peter projects out that if we could actually harness this pace of change effectively, we could soon have an abundance of healthcare, education, clean water, energy in about a decade. And what would the world look like if that was the case, right? Some of what we're seeing out there in the world, the first is we're digitizing the world very rapidly, right? Our memories aren't in our heads anymore, they're in our smartphones. Our relationships are now all digital via social networks as opposed to analog. As we miniaturize all of this computation and put it into everything, we have the whole Internet of Things phenomena. About 10 years ago, we had maybe 500 million internet-connected devices. We're up today to about 12 billion. We'll be at 50 billion by the end of the decade, conservatively. And shortly after that, we're going to get to 1 trillion. So that one statistic, we're at 12 billion today, going to 1 trillion in short order. We think we're 30, 40 years into the information revolution. On that metric, we're about 1%. We're literally just starting. Most of this disruption is actually ahead of us as opposed to behind us. Our best framing and our analogy for this is photography. Some of you are old enough to actually remember film photography. You're operating on a material substrate, and you're operating from a scarcity model. You can only carry so much film around, costs $1 a photograph or so to get your prints done, takes a few days and so on. When you change the substrate to an information-based environment and we move to digital photography, 2 or 3 really interesting things happen. The first is the marginal cost goes to 0. Now we can take 1,000 more photographs and the cost is the same. As a result of that, the domain absolutely explodes. And we start taking thousands of photographs where we used to take very few at the beginning. And the third thing that happens is very subtle but very important is you shift the problem space. So in a scarcity problem space, I take courses in photography so I can learn about composition, I can frame every shot carefully, I can optimize every single click that I take. In an abundance problem space, we all have 8 copies of our photographs on 10 different devices and you simply can't find anything, right? And when you shift the problem space, you shift the business model. And you create entirely new revenue models and business models in a different heuristic. And this explosion that we've seen in photography that we've all lived through, we're now seeing that across all of these other technologies. They're all going through the same type of an explosion. In 3D printing, for example, the huge inflection point is that complexity is free. It's always been true in manufacturing that a more complex object costs more, the design, the fabrication techniques, and so on. And now complexity is free. And the final piece of this, the real driver, is the sheer democratization. As these costs drop to 0, it means that anybody has access to them and can innovate. And what we're seeing today is an explosion of entrepreneurs entering legacy industry with a beginner's mind and leveraging accelerating technologies to make very disruptive changes. Bitcoin is kind of in that kind of path. It's about to kind of explode onto the scene. As a currency, it's quite interesting, but really the real magic underneath Bitcoin is the actual underlying blockchain. How many of you are familiar with the blockchain? I'm happy to deal with it in the Q&A. I consider this the most disruptive innovation I've ever seen. The reason is it allows for decentralized authentication. Right? All of our authentication systems are centralized. voting systems. A bank is a centralized authenticated ledger. It knows that you deposited $100, it knows I lent it out over there, and we trust our life savings to the security in that authentication. If you can decentralize the authentication, you don't need the bank. Selling scarcity is essentially the heart of our business models. If you don't have scarcity, create artificial scarcity like De Beers and the diamond trade. What these new organizations are doing is keeping a very small footprint and tapping into abundance around them. So Uber is tapping into the 96% of the time that your car sits empty. TED uses community, Google uses algorithms, Airbnb taps into assets it doesn't own, and therefore they can scale very well. Note that the mission critical function in Uber, which is to match driver and passenger, does not happen inside the org structure. It happens out in the wild. And when you're running a business, you worry about managing cost of supply and cost of demand. Right? And you try and optimize around both sides of that equation. What the internet did for us, it allowed us to drop the cost of demand exponentially. Online marketing, referral marketing. If you get a viral loop, your acquisition costs go completely to zero. And that was the first time in the history of business you could acquire customers at no cost. What these new exponential organizations have figured out how to do is how do you drop the cost of supply exponentially? So for Airbnb, the marginal cost of adding a room to their inventory is almost zero. Right? If you're Hyatt, you have to build a whole new hotel.
What I would say to people in New Zealand is go pick some of these areas that you're interested in or passionate about, or that New Zealand can lead in. Future of agriculture, future of climate change, for example, there's been demonstrated leadership there. And then really leapfrog the rest of the world in regulatory structures, policy thinking, practical structures that can guide us to the future. Future of education, for example, is ripe for disruption in that sense. And there's no reason you can't do it.